The following contains extreme graphic content such as torture, blood, gore, dismemberment, hatred, vengeance, impalement, burning alive, crushing, defiling, and much more. If none of this is to your liking, then you are advised to walk away now. You have been warned. Cheerilee's Garden.
Cheerilee finally got back to her spot in the prompts corner, still giddy with excitement. She stared at the stage without really seeing it, and it took her a few moments to notice that she hadn't started paying attention to the play at all yet. She was still savoring Scootaloo's last moments in her mind's eye. She shook her head a few times to get a grip, and focused on the stage in front of her. Once she did that, it didn't take her long to figure out what scene they were currently on, and Cheerilee had to suppress another rush of excitement as she realized her next playtime wasn't all that far off. She saw Silver Spoon in her black noble's outfit, and Diamond Tiara in the dark purple gown of the royal advisor approach Reginald's cottage. Based on where the scene fit into the story, that meant Cheerilee had missed the scenes involving Lancelot's broken lance being delivered back to the royal court, as well as the ones where the king decided who to send next. Cheerilee didn't mind having missed these at all. They didn't interest her. She only cared about what was to come next. The pink mare was very happy with the set pieces that formed Reginald's cottage, considering them to be very nicely made. Instead of an actual closed-off building, only the back wall and the left wall had been put into place, giving the audience a clear view of the building's interior. She didn't want to aggrandize her own work, but she was quite proud of the way in which she'd made all of this fit together through her plans and instructions.
With care and caution, my dear Dimas,
The gray filly with the silver mane said.
That's the only way to deal with a pony like him. If you want to harbor any hope of coming out on top, that is.
The white and purple maned filly nodded thoughtfully.
But of course, Silver Tongue. I'm well aware. And of course, in our case, even more thoughtfulness is required. We're not simply telling him to stand down after all.
The two ponies exchanged a grin as they walked down the path towards Reginald's front door, which was placed in the wall on the right side of his house. Of course, the wall itself hadn't been built on the stage, but the audience got the idea behind it easily enough. The two fillies nodded back and forth in front of the door until Silvertongue finally leaned forward with a sigh and knocked on the door. The audience can see a small door at the back of Reginald's house as the antagonist himself stepped through into his living room, carrying a teapot which he put down on the table in the center of the room, next to 3 cups that were already there.
Visitors at this hour of night? I wonder who it could be.
The villain said louder that was perhaps needed, with a fourth wall breaking wink at the audience. He strolled over to the door and opened it, but he left the door chain in place.
Yes?
He asked while peeping through the small opening he had created.
I wasn't expecting any visitors today.
Forget the pleasantries, Reginald dear.
The silver-maned filly said.
We know you know who we are.
Dimas finished the sentence for her companion. Reginald's frown was clearly visible, even to the people in the back of the theater.
Then why knock? Surely you don't believe I'll let you in just so you can apprehend me.
The pair of fillies laughed.
Apprehend you? No, my dear, you have this all wrong. We don't want to apprehend you.
We want to work with you.
To take care of the king.
Once and for all.
The Phillies remained silent for a moment before Dimas added,
We know you're a reasonable guy, Reginald. This will be beneficial to you as well.
Reginald closed the door and took the chain off before opening it fully.
Alright, come in.
He said as he walked to the table in the middle of the room. He grabbed the teapot that stood there by the ear, carefully pouring the tea into 3 of the cups on the table.
Let's hear what you have to say then.
He said as he started sipping from one of the cups. The other 2 gathered around the table as well, each in front of one of the other 2 cups, which they stared at with suspicion.
How exactly do we know that you haven't poisoned these?
Silvertongue demanded to know.
How do you know I didn't poison the tea I prepared without knowing you'd come and that I'm drinking myself?
Reginald mockingly replied. The other 2 seemed to relax at this train of thought, sipping from their mugs slowly. It had been a rather long trip, and as ladies of style, they did enjoy their daily cup of tea. Dimas opened her mouth to start negotiations, when she suddenly fell silent and stared at the cups on the table. 3 cups,
If you didn't know we were coming, why are there 3?
she stated before pressing a hoof up against her head as she took an unsteady step back from the table.
Oh, stars! You did poison us! But you drank how?
Silver said shakingly as she sank to her knees.
It was in the cups, not in the tea.
Snips described as he took another sip. The 2 fillies were swaying about theoretically now, until Dimas suddenly blurted out.
Wait, my head. It was really poisoned!
Before both she and Silver toppled over onto the ground.
Yes, I really poisoned it.
Snips said in confusion. That wasn't in the script. He walked over to a metal ring in the floor and grabbed it between his teeth, pulling it up to reveal a trapdoor. He dragged the perfectly still fillies to the trapdoor one at a time, throwing them into the hole before closing it again.
And there they'll rot. Reginald doesn't deal with traitors. They're too traitorous.
He mused as he exited the stage through the door in the back of his house, the stage lights slowly going out. By the time the curtains closed and the lights above the audience went on to signal the half-show break, Cheerilee was already long gone from her seat in the prompts corner, making her way to an unknown destination under the stage. Silver Spoon woke up feeling groggy, her senses still blurred by whatever it was that had been in those cups. She was vaguely aware of the well-lit circular room, with lots of metallic objects casting the glimmering of reflections everywhere. She tried moving her head, but found, to her great shock and surprise, that she could not. The sudden panic she felt helped clear her senses in a matter of moments, and her sight quickly returned to her. Fear gripped her when she found that she could not move her legs, except for the front left one, which she could move slightly. It felt as if some metallic bands anchored them to the ground, and something was likewise keeping her from closing her eyes. The taste of iron filled her mouth, since it was being held open by some sort of cylinder. Her tongue rested inside of the cylinder, and she could move it around freely, a fact that she capitalized on that as she explored the inside. It wasn't solid by any means, but it felt more like a frame that was held by a basic cylindrical shape, but she couldn't bite down onto it or spit it out, no matter how hard she tried. Attempts at moving her body proved pointless as well. Apart from the bands around her hooves and whatever was keeping her head in place, something was pulling her up around her middle, so she couldn't slouch down either. Realizing she wouldn't get out of this predicament on her own, she looked around the room as best as she could. The first thing she noticed was a grotesque machine, a mess of metallic arms, wheels, and vicious tools which extended from a center black box. It seemed to be on rails, and Silver noted some of these rails ran towards her as well, but she couldn't look down to see where they ended. As she wasn't able to determine the machine's use or function, she quickly lost interest. It was then that she finally saw Diamond Tiara, a few meters to the right of the machine, trapped in much the same she was. That is to say, her hooves had been attached to the ground with metal clamps, and she had a leather band around her middle, which was attached to the ceiling with chains. She wasn't wearing her costume anymore, which made Silver realize she couldn't feel hers on her body either. On top of all that, there was a glass wall around Tiara, the filly standing at the center of the glass cylinder. It seemed like the whole construction couldn't be lifted up out of its place by a few chains connected to the top of the glass wall, as it only reached halfway up to the ceiling. Spoon also spotted several tubes and hoses opening into the cylinder, but nothing seemed to be coming out of them, for now. Tiara's head was fixed to look in the gray filly's direction, and freaky little metal clamps held her eyes open. She didn't appear to have anything in her mouth though, and Silver Spoon didn't think she was even awake yet. Spoon's eyes slowly started drying out, but before the sensation could become unbearable, some kind of liquid dripped down into her eyes, moistening them up. Silver shuddered to think about the reasons anyone could have to strap her into so elaborate a device, but she managed to keep her calm. It was possible they had accidentally been poisoned, and this was a high-tech medical facility after all. She didn't really believe it herself, but the thought did keep her from screaming right there and then. The thought and the thing in her mouth she was forced to admit. Right then, Diamond Tiara woke up. As she did not seem to possess Silver Spoon's calm disposition, she immediately shrieked when she found out that she was being held immobile in a glass ball, until her eyes fell on the gray filly a few meters away from her.
Silver Spoon, what's going on? Where are we? Get me out!
She cried. Silver tried to respond, but her reply of,
I don't know, calm down,
wasn't of much use to Diamond.
Finally awake, I see,
said a calm voice accompanied by hoofsteps. As Cheerilee stepped into the room, Diamond immediately started calling out for her help, but Cheerilee paid her no heed. She seemed far more interested in Spoon and the machine in the middle.
So let's get started, shall we?
She said as she walked right in between the two fillies, pulling down on a lever on the machine's right side. At once it zoomed to life, little lights flickering on all around it as metallic arms swung down and moved into place. Cheerilee walked over to the gray filly, who was now positively terrified, and whispered into her ear.
You have no idea how much research and measuring you up went into this, but I got it all right. You'll see.
What do you mean?
The filly asked in confusion, but Cheerilee simply shook her head and smiled as she took a few steps back.
Oh, and if you feel around with that free leg of yours, you should find a button. Just hold it down if you've had enough. But I warn you, your friend won't like it,
Cheerilee said, giggling girlishly at the end of her sentence. Spoon tried to follow her teacher with her gaze, being both utterly confused and terrified at the same time. But Cheerilee quickly disappeared from her narrow field of vision. Her attention was suddenly grabbed by the strange device in the center of the room, as it started to roll towards her. At first, the silver filly just watched in bewilderment, until she spotted one of the robotic arms lifting a metal needle up to the same height as her left eye, keeping it there as it advanced. If her eyelids weren't already artificially being held open, her eyes would have grown wide with fear when she realized what was about to happen there.
What? Don't do it! Come here!
She begged, getting more spit out of her mouth than intelligible words. She saw the tip of the needle slowly come closer to her as she tried to wrestle free from her bonds. She came to the same conclusion she had before. She'd never get free on her own. She racked her brain for a way out as she started to panic, until she suddenly remembered Cheerilee's words. She felt around with her left hoof, and sure enough, she bumped into a slightly elevated point on the floor. The button! Without hesitation, she pushed down onto it, and the needle came to an immediate halt about 5 centimeters from her face. She sighed in relief. That had been a lot easier than she had expected. Maybe it was a test, and now that she had passed it, Cheerilee would... She never got to finish her train of thought, as Diamond Tiara's terrifying screams pierced her eardrums. Looking past the machine with her right eye, Spoon focused her gaze on the glass tank her friend was in. Some kind of clear liquid was now flowing into the tank from various pipes and hoses on the side, and it was slowly spreading over the floor. Silver Spoon quickly drew the connection between her pressing the button, the machine stopping, and the liquid starting to fill up the tank. But compared to her losing an eye, she thought Diamond could afford to get wet for a while. The light pink filly didn't seem to agree, as she screamed fearfully.
Spoon! Help! Get me out of here!
Silver rolled her eyes at this. Well, as best as she could, that is. What could she do to help anyway? The level of the water in the tank kept rising. As it finally got high enough to touch the bottom of Diamond's legs, Silver Spoon realized her mistake. She watched in horror as her friend screamed in pain, a cloud of red blood diffusing into the clear liquid as it ate away at the filly's flesh. What Spoon had assumed to be water was obviously acid of some description, and it was safe to bet that Diamond had smelled that ages ago. The corrosive liquid continued to pour into the glass tank, chunks of flesh already coming loose from just above Diamond's hooves as they got soaked in it. The white of bone became visible quickly, and Tiara screamed and begged for Cheerilee, or Spoon, or anyone really to please make it stop.
Do you like it? They use that stuff to clean carcasses, you know. Get some nice skeletons to display in the classroom.
Silver heard her teacher say from behind her. She reluctantly looked at the needle still suspended in the air in front of her, and then took a deep breath. Summoning all of her courage, and with tears rolling out of the corners of her eyes, she slowly slid her hoof off the button. At once the machine buzzed to life again, and the flow of acid into the glass tank stopped. Diamond Tiara shrieked heartbreakingly for a while longer, before dying down to sobbing as the last piece of flesh touching the ferocious liquid got melted right off of her bones. She had nothing but bone left up the 2 centimeters from her hoof up, and a stream of blood was flowing down into the acid from the frayed and disfigured stump of meat just above it. The scarlet clouds that floated around the vicious liquid vanished quickly as well, apparently no more resistant of the corrosion that Diamond's flesh was. Spoon's lips trembled as the needle approached her eye, filling more and more of her field of vision. Then, after what had seemed like an eternity, it finally reached its destination. The silver filly felt the pressure on her eye increase for a moment before the needle suddenly popped in and pain exploded inside of her head. She let out an unintelligible, garbled scream as pain receptors she never imagined existed bombarded her mind with warning signals, telling her something was wrong, not knowing or caring about the fact that she was powerless to do anything about it. The left side of her vision first colored red, and then suddenly winked out, as half of her world darkened forever. Silver Spoon momentarily forgot her pain, as she wondered why she had never realized how much her sight meant to her, until that moment. Agony once again washed over her as 2 little hooks sprang out of the tip of the needle, anchoring themselves into her eyeball. The needle started to spin around, and Silver almost threw up right there as she felt her eyes start to turn with it. Her hoarse cries echoed throughout the room as the device spun its appendage around faster and faster, winding her optical nerves up like a bored child would a piece of string. The painful sensor overload was too much for the little filly to bear, and shame got added to her torment as she lost control of her bladder. The needle suddenly drew back, taking her eye with it as she felt warm blood drip down her cheek. She wanted to scream and push her hoof up against her now empty socket, but her stomach protested so much that she needed all of her willpower in order to not throw up all over herself, and even her left leg was too restricted to get her hoof up all the way. She panted heavily into the metal cylinder as sweat dripped down her body, and the machine withdrew slightly, holding up the skewered eye that had once belonged to her, like a trophy. At that point, Silver Spoon noticed Tiara looking at her from the corner of her eye, and her friend looked even more sick to the stomach than she was feeling herself. But the Silver Filly saw yet another emotion in the Pink Filly's eyes: hope and gratefulness. She reminded herself that her suffering might yet save her friend, as perhaps Cheerilee would let Tiara go if she persevered. She built up an iron fortress of resolve, which melted like ice before the sun as she saw the machine drew closer once more. It had replaced the arm with the needle in favor of one of the 4 sharp blades, coming together into a tip like some sort of drill. The menacing contraption started to spin around at high speed, accompanied by a low buzzing noise as it drew ever nearer. It didn't take Silver Spoon long to figure out that it wasn't aimed at her remaining eye, though with only one eye left she found it somewhat hard to determine its trajectory. Suddenly she swallowed as best as she could as it dawned on her, and the reason for the cylinder in her mouth became chillingly clear. She hesitated for a moment, but just before the blades entered her mouth, she pressed down on the button again. And once she could hear Diamond scream as the very first drop that flowed out of the pipes raised the level of vitriol enough to contact with her soft, tender flesh, starting the suffering of the Pink Filly all over again.
Silver Spoon! Silver Spoon!
She cried, apparently in too much pain to think of anything better. Silver Spoon cried clear tears from her right eye and bloody ones from her socket as she sobbed.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Over and over, shaking in disgust at her own perceived cowardice. But as Diamond's flesh slowly got consumed by the vicious agent, it became clear that Cheerilee had a few more tricks up her sleeve. A loud banging noise announced the arrival of 4 small but very heavy balls which came rolling through as of yet unused pipes, only to plummet down into the bath of acid below. The deceptively innocent-looking liquid splashed up around them, raining down upon the purple and white-maned filly from every direction. Small drops fell down onto her back, melting holes through her coat and skin, leaving tiny bloody craters behind as a sort of grotesque parody of a lunar landscape. At the same time, a bigger wave of the stuff crashed into her right flank, her cutie mark melting away as the old troll dug into her, bloody blisters bulging up around the edges of her wounds. She instantly felt an extreme burning sensation on her left shoulder as well, but by far the worst was the splash that hit her right in the face. She shrieked like a banshee as it burned through her right cheek, exposing muscles and white bones and offering a view of the inside of her mouth. In a matter of minutes, her appearance changed that from a cute filly into that of a monster, with half of her face missing and the rest of her body covered in bloody blisters, craters, and sores, not quite unlike how some ponies might picture a zombie. In addition to that, the acid kept melting away the flesh from her legs as well, having reached up just under her knees now. Silver Spoon couldn't bear it any longer and pulled her hoof off of the button, determined to never press it down ever again, no matter what the cost. She swallowed back her fears as the blade started spinning again and approached her. She had liked the name of her character in the play, Silvertongue, as that was exactly how she viewed herself. She had always thought that she had a knack for using words to suit her own purpose, and would perhaps have gone far in diplomacy business, or something like that one day. She thought it likely that Cheerilee knew this as well, and didn't doubt that this was all some sort of sick joke to her. She couldn't understand her teacher's reasons or motivations, and in just a few idle seconds, she'd never be able to ask. She tried screaming out, but no answer ever came as the blades passed her lips. A maelstrom of cuts and slices rained down upon the tip of her tongue as the blades tore into it. Hot blood filled her mouth, slipped down her throat, and dripped down her chin as she tried to scream. But she only managed to produce a disgusting, wet gurgling noise from the back of her throat. Her body shook, and her one remaining eye rolled back into her head as the knives continued their bloody work. They advanced slowly, and to Spoon it seemed slower still, as she experienced pain such a magnitude that the loss of her eye paled in comparison. Bit by bit her tongue got shredded, and the remaining stumps of it flailed around as she tried to keep it out of reach, but the blades were everywhere. Suddenly the machine stopped and pulled back. Having made mincemeat out of the very last part of Silver's tongue, the searing needles that had been poking around in her mouth turned into an intense but monotonous pain, which was only broken by the pounding sensation she felt where her tongue had once been. Even in her dazed and sickened state, she felt the acute need to breathe, as the blood that had flown down her throat threatened to drown her. With a hacking cough and a surge of energy born from desperation, she managed to force the blood up and out of her throat, making it spill out of her mouth and cascade down her body like a waterfall. With the stabbing sensation in her empty socket and the pounding in her mouth, Silverspoon could barely think straight anymore. It was as if pain had become her only reality, and it blocked everything else out. She tried to speak, but could only produce a low, guttural sound, which would have made her envious of Diamond's constant moans and sobs were she still able to consciously register them. Cheerilee noticed the lack of resistance in Silver, and was thoroughly disappointed. Sure, the crying and the sounds she made were amusing, but it wasn't quite what she had been hoping for. Scootaloo had put up a better fight than that. She walked over to the machine and turned it off, moving to the side of the room to pick up a small box of tools she had left there, just in case. No matter how well she calibrated all of these machines, Cheerilee harbored no illusions. When it finally came down to it, she could only count on herself to get the job done right. She took out a hammer and a chisel and put them down next to the only semi-conscious Silverspoon. In the absence of any digits, such as the ones the Griffins had, ponies had to find a different way to hold the chisel in place as they swung the hammer. The solution came in the form of a metal shoe, which extended past the hoof and had a hole in the tip, which could hold the chisel in place. Typically, a chisel and a shoe were made in such a way that the thicker part of the end of the chisel, where the hammer would hit, couldn't fit through the hole. Cheerilee slipped on the heavy shoe and put the chisel through the hole with her teeth, before grabbing hold of the hammer in the same way. She positioned the chisel carefully, aiming it right above the filly's right hoof, just under the metal band holding her right leg in place. With a great swing, she brought the hammer down, driving the tip of the chisel into the filly's leg, scraping up against her hoof from above. Silverspoon, who had been apathetically floating in a sea of pain until now, suddenly let out a piercing, if garbled, shriek as her remaining eye flew wide open. More of her blood started spilling onto the floor, and Cheerilee grinned as best as she could while holding onto the hammer. The area just above a hoof was one of the most sensitive spots in the pony body, which was why the hoof protected it so well in the first place. She drew the hammer back and slammed it down again and again, driving the thin metal rod further in with every swing. The yelps and cries from the filly excited her further and further, and she began to have trouble keeping the hammer in her mouth because her body trembled so. With a last mighty swing, the tip of the chisel suddenly emerged from the other side of the filly's hoof, as the poor thing whimpered in pain, and her blood stained the floor in multiple places. With a rush of inspiration, Cheerilee swung the hammer down again, this time not aiming for the thinner bulge at the end, but simply for the side of the chisel as the metal rod struck horizontally in the filly's leg. The blow pushed the rod down against her hoof, which, already not attached to her leg in the middle anymore, simply broke off, leaving only a bloody stump with some scattered fragments of hoofs still attached. The filly let out a gurgling cry of pain as her eye rolled back into its socket, and then suddenly fell silent. Cheerilee frowned as she dropped the hammer and brought her head level with Spoon's. The little wretch had fainted.
Oh, come on, not now! It's only starting to get fun!
She screamed in frustration as she swung a hoof at the filly's head, hitting her right in the face. There wasn't even the tiniest response, and the pink mare sighed. She quickly started undoing the binds that held Silver Spoon in place, the filly falling into a pool of her own blood as she slipped off the last ones. Cheerilee grabbed the filly by her mane and started dragging her to the side of the room, leaving a wide red smudge trailing behind her victim. A portion of the floor had been slightly lowered there, leaving a small depressed circle in the ground, which had been outside the filly's vision so far. Nonchalantly, she threw the filly into the circle, not particularly caring how she landed. She fell down in a crumpled heap in the center and remained there motionlessly, except for the slight heaving in her chest with every breath. Cheerilee made her way to the glass tank, staring straight into Diamond's eyes, not completely sure the filly still had the use of her right eye, the acid having taken a heavy toll on that side of her face.
Will you let me go?
The filly managed to say hoarsely, obviously nearing the end of her strength. Cheerilee smiled her kindest smile.
But of course I'll let you go. And Silver Spoon as well. But only if you can reach her.
She broke into a grin as she walked to the wall, pulling down one of the levers there. At once, several holes opened in the floor inside of the glass walls, draining away the liquid inside. Once it was mostly gone, she pulled another lever. The glass circle got lifted up off the ground until there was enough space underneath it for a pony to walk upright. At the same time, the filly's bindings automatically released her, and she crashed down to the floor from a small height. Her legs, bare bones up to her knees, couldn't support her weight and snapped in two, sharp fragments of bone jumping away as the pitiful remnants of her lower legs fell away to the sides. As luck would have it, the sharp shard of her right leg buried itself in Diamond's side as she fell onto it, and for the 100th time that evening, Tiara howled in pain even while trying to overcome the shock of breaking all of her legs at once. As the little stumps she had left hit the ground, the small layer of acid still there started biting into her stomach, but that pain paled in comparison to what Tiara had already been through, and she paid it almost no heed as she tried to bite back the agony as she already was in.
So just get your friend and you're both out of here. Who knows, there might even be unicorn doctors good enough to fix you up.
The teacher pony chuckled maliciously. Tiara tried to get up, but as soon as she attempted to rest any weight on the jagged shards of bones now sticking out of her considerably shortened legs, she fell right back down again. panting more heavenly than a mare in labor. Even if she hadn't been in pain, it wouldn't have been easy to balance on the stumps of the bones at all. For a moment, she thought of giving up right then and there, but she was instantly reminded of the bravery her friend had shown every time she refused to push down the button any longer. She owed it to her to at least try. It was a few meters to the pit in the ground, so the light pink filly started to lift her little legs over her head, trying to drag her body forward. Every time she did that, she felt like she was about to faint from the pain, but she pressed on and persevered to save herself and her friend. Cheerilee watched with giddy excitement, taunting the filly every step of the way.
Hey, almost there. What's taking you so long? Come on, up the pace,
she said, laughing. The filly ignored her as best as she could, and finally reached the circular pit in the ground. She tried to carefully lower herself into it, but slipped and fell, driving the bone shard still deeper into her side. She winced and groaned as she dragged herself to the center of the circle, putting the stumps of her front legs around Silver Spoon in a clumsy hug.
Oh, Spoon,
she managed to say.
I'm here.
The gray filly managed to whisper as she slowly opened an eye. The other pony tried to smile at her friend, but the result was grotesque at best.
We'll be okay. She'll let us go. I reached you.
Yeah, about that.
Came Cheerilee's cold voice as she pulled down yet another lever.
I lied.
Both of the fillies looked up as they heard a rumbling noise coming from a pipe above them. As they saw a familiar clear liquid gush down, they realized that they wouldn't get to see anything else. Ever again.